Now time for Sports and Courts, legal issues in the sports world with Brett Hastings from the Hastings Injury Law Firm. Hit back with Hastings.
All right, time to talk legal issues. Frank Frangie, Hayes Carlin, JJ LaSelva, the counselors here. Brett Hastings, he's still beaming for that national championship. Can you tell that? I am too. We all are. But he still walks in with this big grin on his face.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Yes,
right?
we're all beaming. So, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
Doing good.
All right, we got all kind. We're going to potpourri. We're going to go through a lot of topics. So, I want to start with when Greg Sankey made his address at the SEC. He said a lot of his constituents, I think he was talking about people under him, asking him, "Why are we still in the NCAA?" Which got everybody thinking. Is there a chance that the SEC, the conference, would pull out of the NCAA? What are the legalities of something like that?
They could absolutely do it. At the end of the day, the NCAA is a private, institution that oversees these other public institutions, but everybody sort of chooses to join or be a part of it, right? And it's because here's an administering body that puts together all these different tournaments. We've got, the baseball tournament going on right now. As you're talking about, we just had the basketball tournament. And so, those things are there, but you elect or choose to do them. So if everybody in the Southeastern Conference decided today that they wanted to be out of the NCAA, boom, they could do it. Now that would create all kinds of issues from a scheduling standpoint, and all of those different issues. But just legally speaking, could they be out? Yes, they could be out tomorrow.
And there's no buyout like these teams have, like FSU had or like coaches have, right?
Correct.
There's nothing like you leave.
Correct, right. Now, are they going to do it right now? I don't think so.
Right, no, I hear you. But I mean, the point is, and that's a different conversation, but I mean, they could leave without everything's got a buyout, but there wouldn't be one there.
And if the SEC and Big Ten do this collectively and they have 34 teams, which is more than what the NFL has. I mean, if they wanted to start their own football league, is there anything that ACC Big 12 schools can do, the group of 5 schools, to collectively, could they sue the SEC and Big 10 for leaving? Or is that just, look, that's the evolution of the economics of this sport?
Yeah,
and,
there's nothing I think they could do. They couldn't demand, to be a part of it or whatever, because at the core of so many of the issues that we talk about are antitrust. And, another word for antitrust, because, it sounds so legalish, right, is that it's anti-competition. And so, we are a free market capitalist economy, and our laws are to try to create that. But if you got multiple leagues, that's consistent with competition, right? Yeah. So where all this comes from is you say, hey, these guys, the NCAA, the NFL, they're the only game in town, so you have to deal with them. And so, if the ACC and the Big 12 or anybody would go out there, the way we'd look at it legally is go have the best product, right? And so, I think we know that there's more eyeballs that are going to be turned on, and that's ultimately where the value's derived for these sports organizations, the SEC or the Big Ten. So they're, quote, the most valuable and probably have the most leverage, and the ACC and Big 12, are behind them. But, the reality is if we look at things right now, we just had a bunch of changes in the seedings, right, to the playoff in college football, correct?
Right.
Did the NCAA do that? No, right?
Right.
This kind of ruling body and committee that's out there. So I think ultimately the SEC, these power conferences are going to remain in the NCAA, but I don't believe it'll happen in football. Looking at the law, looking at it as a consumer, I just think we're heading towards a 64 team, group of super conferences, SEC, Big Ten, and then you're going to have these other groups, kind of come in, and that's what we're going to see, at least for college football. I think the biggest things to hold them in are, March Madness, and the tournament is still, hugely generates all kinds of not only excitement, but the money, the dollars, that the tournament goes and generates. Is sort of the one thing the NCAA has going for them, and the SEC, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12 are going to still want to participate in that. And then most of the other sports where people aren't going on to be, the Travis Hunters of the world or whatever, but, women's volleyball and all these other things, the NCAA really does a service for student athletes. So I think football is going to go its way, and these other ones are going to remain in sort of the new era. And, as we talk about every week, eventually, though, we got to deal with, the employees and pay for play and that type of stuff.
Well, we're going to move on to other topics, but I will close this one with what you said. If football does its own thing, the first thing that has to happen is we need to demolish this conference letter. If there's no more football, we can't have the Cal volleyball team flying to Miami to play a conference to have a conference match. So that I think if you see football do its own thing, you're going to see a massive reorganization of this stupid conference alignment that we have now because it's terribly unfair to the Olympic sports. Let's move on.
Right.
The University of Florida, according to a report in the Gainesville Sun, had a player who was a minor, 17 years old, accused of false imprisonment, quote, dating violence, among other accusations from another minor. And so the player nor the accused person and the alleged victim cannot be named. What'd you make of this story? It was an odd story to me. I get it, by the way. The law is you can't name a minor, right? But say it more eloquently than I will, or I have.
All right. So false imprisonment, and here it's in a domestic context, is really ultimately restraining somebody, right, from being able to go somewhere or to do anything else. Kidnapping, we hear about, you literally physically take somebody to another location. Now, what's interesting and what I think happens in these types of situations are we don't have the actual arrest docket. I did read a report from the Gainesville Sun where it appears they were able, to read it. But a lot of times right now it's at the charging phase. So somebody got arrested. They were called out there. They were able to effectuate an arrest, at that time. And so they'll go ahead and charge it for this false imprisonment. At the time, it's a third-degree felony, which is the highest level, right?
Okay, right?
A lot of times you'll see this end up becoming a domestic battery. And really, ultimately, what decides if a domestic battery is going to be a misdemeanor or a felony is how much, whether or not the person is seriously injured. That's what escalates that up to a felony battery. If somebody's pregnant, that can make it a felony battery or whatever. So they're going to charge it up at this highest level. I think there's going to end up being a resolution in juvenile court that deals with the domestic issues here, typically anger management, stuff like that. They're going to talk to the victim, determine whether or not there's going to be, no contact in this situation. But, at least what I read in the reports, it was really pretty bad. This was a highly physical altercation. And I would imagine if we saw the docket, there would be multiple charges based on these facts, not just that one.
Well, according to the report in the Gainesville Sun, Hayes, and I'm just reading probably from the same report Brett was referencing, the alleged attacker pushed the victim onto a bed, proceeded to get on top of her, and then hold her down, began to choke her, and the victim said she could not breathe. So, yes, it's very serious stuff if indeed the accusations are correct.
Yeah, without a doubt. And obviously we'll see what Billy Napier elects to do, with this player. I was fascinated by the Justice Department weighing in already on Zeigler, who obviously is suing the NCAA for basically another year of eligibility, even though he really doesn't have the argument of the JUCO or anything like that we've seen like a Diego Pavia successfully win.
Right.
What did you make of that? What does it tell you about where that case might be headed?
First and foremost, I thought I was shocked how swiftly and so the listeners understand what there was a Department of Justice advisory opinion. Okay. So that's essentially the lawyers for the government saying, hey, we think this is what's important to understand about the law. Now, in the Zeigler case, we've got a sitting judge in Tennessee and federal district court who's going to be making these decisions. She does not have to follow what the Department of Justice says, but you get an understanding that it's like, okay, this is the highest ranking legal officer, not a judge, and this is the direction that we think it should go.
Let me stop you just for a second. I don't want to interrupt you, but for people that didn't follow this a week ago, a basketball player from the University of Tennessee has played his 4 years, all 4 at the University of Tennessee. He's now suing for the opportunity to play more years at Tennessee because of the possible dollars he could make. So even though he's played his 4, he's suing. He wasn't a junior college guy like the Vanderbilt quarterback Pavia, but he's suing to have more than his 4 years. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I want people that don't know what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about now. Continue.
Yeah, he plans to go to grad school. Says if I'm in grad school, I should be able to make this money. And anybody who knows about Zakai Zeigler, what is he, like 5'6", 5'7"? He's
probably
one of the smallest.
He's not an NBA player.
Right. He's the smallest, best player you've seen in the SEC, but he's not a guy to be in the NBA. So it's a test case for those reasons. But it was literally, I filed, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. We discussed it here on Sports and Courts, and that quickly, this Department of Justice opinion came out. What I think is it's indicative of the fact that Nick Saban and all these guys are up in Congress, that they know there needs to be some type of federal direction given to all of these states. And so it's very clear that President Trump is going to be, trying to push these things in the right direction. So what I took of it, to answer your question, Hayes, is that I don't know that the judge is necessarily going to follow it again. We got a federal district judge who's going to follow the law, but is in Tennessee, okay? But, you got a pretty clear opinion, I believe, from the Department of Justice to say that this is not an antitrust violation, right? That what we want to see is young people get their degrees, and when they get their full degree, college should end, and then they should go on to do what's next.
Brett, in all these cases, will the federal opinion trump, and I'm not saying it because it's the president's name, I'm being serious, will these opinions trump anything under that? Will they trump state court? Will they trump what the NCAA is trying to do? I mean, once the Department of Justice speaks, is that it? Is there the king? I mean, there's a Supreme Court, I guess you could challenge it in, but how does that work?
Right. So federal law generally preempts state law, okay? But there are certain things that are left to the state, that are for the state to go and determine. What I think is interesting here is that President Trump is a very strong proponent of trying to decentralize the power of the federal government and give the states the rights to govern themselves.
That's correct.
Governor DeSantis is a huge proponent of that. And so I think that actually makes the college football issue a little bit more difficult because they want there to be direction. They want essentially for all of these schools and these other people to figure it out. But overall, politically, they do not want to just have the federal government override states' rights in general. So to answer your question, if they put together a federal law that would pass through everybody, that could preempt state law. But I think there's still a lot that needs to happen for that to be able to, come to pass.
I guess what I'm really curious about is everybody is trying to make doctrine here. The college sports world says we want to do this. So not even the NCAA, just some college leaders say, well, we want to have a czar who's the head of the College Sports Commission, I think. So we want to do this. But now some state legislators are saying, no, we want to do this so we protect our school. So now the Department of Justice comes along and says, no. Well, you see what I mean?
Right.
There's the NCAA. Then there's this group that wants to run college football called the College Sports Commission. Then there's these state legislators who say, no, we want to trump you. Now here comes a federal law that says, no, we want to trump you. At the end of the day, I'm just wondering who's going to win. I guess that's the most simple way I can ask the question.
I'm constantly part of mediations.
Right.
And so one of the things the mediators always say is that, hey, if this case is going to get resolved today, then one side's probably going to feel like they had to give up a little bit more than they wanted to, and the other side's probably going to feel like they had to give up a little bit more than they wanted to.
Gotcha.
I don't think we're going to legislate this anytime soon and get it resolved. But I think, because there's big money in it, right? And there are a lot of motivating factors for everybody to get together. Television, athletic directors, state legislative officials, all of these different things. And everybody's going to have to come to an agreement and sort of choose to be governed, in this. If you look at it, the federal government really doesn't tell the NFL what to do, and look at it's the most successful sports organization, probably in the world. But what you see happen there, you have collective bargaining, right? The players have to be heard, the owners, you got to work out a balance. They work with TV. So I think ultimately we've got to get to the point of having a czar, figuring out who are going to are going to be the people there to do it. And I think that's another reason why we're going to see it happen in football and maybe not in some of these other parts for the NCAA, because I think we can identify sort of who these power programs are, who the stakeholders are, and can get people together and say, hey, let's figure out a way that we can, not only make this successful, but I don't know how you feel, but I don't want it to be the NFL, right? I want guys to kind of go to school and they're Seminoles for life and they're dogs for life and they're Gators for life.
Me too.
And, I want people to go and get their education. And I don't want to have a 35-year-old free safety at Florida, right? Nobody really wants that. And so I think they've got to go and figure out that balance. But I think that's going to be negotiated much more than it's ever going to be legislated or litigated. And if it's legislated or litigated, we're going to be talking about this stuff for 10 more years. And I just think the finances of it are going to be a large enough driver that everybody's going to have to go in and give up a little bit more than they want to, and put the best interest of all involved, which is preserve these traditions for college football. That's what makes it unique from, the NFL or the marching bands. And it's the biggest deal going on in Alabama and Mississippi and these other places. And that's what I think we've got to keep. So.
Brett Hastings from the Hastings Injury Law Firm. Really good work. That was Sports and Courts and a variety of topics. Back after this, Hayes has headlines. Stay with us.